Hello, everybody. Welcome in wherever you are in the world. Looking forward to a really cool webinar here today for you all. We're just going to give it about 1 minute while we wait for everyone to filter into the room. But while we do that, we do have a poll for you all to help us out with. We're kind of just curious to see responses here from the audience. So as you see that poll, as you're joining in, if you could give us an answer on that, that'd be great. It's always cool for us to kind of just see where are people in their Nautobot journey. Just kind of curious. I mean, just exploring. Maybe you haven't installed it yet, or maybe you have and you're running along with it somewhere. So just kind of interested to see where you're at as we join in here. So for those just joining in, it is taking a minute. We have a lot of people in the webinar today. So we're going to wait about 1 minute as we let everyone filter in and get this rolling. So as we wait, if you could please just give us an answer on that poll. We'll wait just a few more seconds. Everyone get joined in before we get started here. We do have a fully packed webinar, so it's going to be really great content for you today. Looking forward to getting into this and going over it with you. Right, we are almost there. Looks like we're stabilizing on the room population. Great seeing you all today. Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Let's go ahead and get started. So today, this is in our webinar Next series, and we're going over Nautobot Jobs, operationalizing automation for everyone with Nautobot Jobs. Today, we'll be hosted by Eric Chow and, of course, myself, Tim Shryack. We're happy to take you through this webinar, and today we're going to go over some topics, including what are Nautobot Jobs. We're going to take a look at the Jobs framework. What does that mean inside of Nautobot? We'll go through a demo. We'll talk about some use cases, and of course, we'll do some Q&A. So starting into what are Nautobot Jobs, let's kind of just lay the groundwork for this topic as we think about, what exactly are we talking about? So the idea here is that Nautobot Jobs combine direct access to Nautobot's data models and execution engine with the full flexibility of Python to deliver automated outcomes. So whether you're an experienced Python developer or just getting started, you already have what it takes to build powerful workflows in Nautobot. Workflows are just repeatable, auditable, and secure. So really, this is a great way to think of how I can leverage the data I have inside of my Nautobot platform and the Python environment that's available to me. So as we think about how do we move from scripts to automated operations, Nautobot Jobs offer all the flexibility of our traditional scripts while adding structure, visibility, and collaboration. They make automation more scalable and production ready. And before Jobs, you might have had a script on someone's laptop or a shared drive and no idea who last touched it or used it. With Jobs, everything is actually centralized. You can version control it and even set up scheduling. So your team can execute tasks safely from the UI without needing CLI access. On the administrative control side, we have that centralized management, right? So Nautobot centralizes your scripts so they're easier to access and execute, moving them around from personal folders and lesser known shared locations to a central repository, providing you the ability to enhance your availability throughout the organization. We also have direct network source of truth integration, that is with Nautobot, right? So direct access to the data in Nautobot. This is one of the major benefits is that we're able to very easily include data from Nautobot within our Python code, access it, leverage it, and use it as part of our code in the way that we execute our jobs. It is really easy to use, right? It's schedulable. Nautobot Jobs can be set to execute on a schedule, which ensures that jobs can be executed in a timely fashion, or maybe you want to set up a job that runs in an off hours window, for example. You want something to run at 2 a.m. every day or once a week or what have you. We can also initiate jobs from the UI. So that you can execute whether as a user or other non-technical person, right, can execute jobs as well. So you don't need to have a high technical capability to then use jobs because of that easy integration with the UI. And finally, team-friendly development. We have the idea of version control there where we're storing our jobs in a Git repository or other repository. And that could be GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, you name it, right? And allows for easy collaboration. because we're able to work collaboratively on our scripts. We can share them, we can leverage them together. So instead of just one person having access to the power scripts that we might develop within our team, they're available to everyone. And so we have that equal opportunity, if you will, to take advantage of the various code that we have written. And Nautobot jobs widely applicable. We can use them no matter what it might be as our target, right? So Nautobot itself could be a target for a Nautobot job to retrieve data or make changes directly to the Nautobot platform. We can use jobs to make changes to network devices, to collect information or push configuration to physical or even virtual devices. And finally, to IT management platforms. Whether we're interacting with a ticketing tool or CMDB or even a monitoring system, jobs can be leveraged against any number of IT management platforms as well. So that brings us to now talking about the job framework. But before we do that, let's just take a quick look at that poll that everyone had a chance to answer there back at the beginning. Hopefully you gave us an answer on that. And just kind of curious to see how we're doing here. So let's just kind of take a look at this. Eric, if you have any comments as we think about this, this poll here. So kind of to what we have seen similar in some of the past, where a good chunk of you have not yet installed Nautobot, you're just exploring. So about 45% of you there. And then we've got the rest here in some form of using Nautobot kind of along the journey. And it looks like we've got the biggest chunk kind of just in that running Nautobot in production, but and using jobs, which that's really great. Great to see that you all kind of interested in maybe learning how to use jobs even more. And we're going to definitely go through that here in the webinar today. A
Yeah,
couple of quick, oh, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say it's kind of surprising that a lot of people almost have a just kind of exploring, and hopefully, by the end of this webinar, you have some motivations. We could interest you enough to actually take some steps. We're gonna have tools, resources for you to get started. So, I'm excited actually to kind of reach out to people who haven't seen the power of jobs. That we hopefully at some point during this webinar or after that we could convert you to one of the other buckets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to show you the power of using a job versus executing code external to Nautobot, and you're going to see a lot of advantages of that as we go through today. Absolutely. Couple of quick housekeeping items. One, please do use the Q&A box as you go through the webinar. If you have any questions for us today, that makes it easy for us to track those questions, get you answers, and make sure everyone can participate in those questions as well. So please use that. As well as, please do use the reactions button that you will see down there on your Zoom screen. That's really helpful for us to know things that you're interested in, things that are lighting you up, things that you find, really curious or that you are wondering about. Like, please use those. That's really helpful for us as we're presenting. We can really better understand and make sure that we're tuning the webinar here today to things that are interesting to you all. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand over to Eric here to go through the job framework.
Thank you, Tim, for the overview and welcome. And I'm happy to see maybe some old friends, maybe some new people who's just interested in exploring the jobs. So I'm happy to share this job framework with all of you. And let's talk about some of the technical details for the jobs framework, shall we? So where do we store jobs? Storing job in the correct location is pretty essential. So for instance, I don't know if any of you are real estate, but location, location, location. Just like Python and the Django framework, we try to make a sensible default. So if for more experienced users, we want to let them know that something that just works. So in that instance, not about jobs, not about checks in the jobs root directory. A lot of times this is your not about root slash jobs for any kind of jobs for you to register. So that is a sensible default, but that's also be able to override through your environment. So placing your job file, Python scripts in that folder will automatically register for that job as long as you follow a certain format, which we'll cover in a little bit. As Tim mentioned, we could also store it in Git repository, synchronize it, and we leverage all the features for Git. We could have some version control, we could have collaboration, history tracking, bug tracking or comments, everything that Git offers, we could actually directly inherit through jobs if we keep them in the Git repository. And obviously, there's some once you have jobs, you have a collection of jobs. This is typically the kind of the flow, right? You start with a simple job, maybe some Python script that an advanced engineer, senior engineer have on their laptop. We operationalize it, we codify it into a job. Then some people say, hey, what about this feature? So we have multiple jobs we have in the collection. And at some point, we have many, many collection of jobs that serves the same function. Then perhaps we want to morph it into a custom Nautobot apps. So, Nautobot jobs could be story Nautobot apps as well that interact directly with other apps, data with Nautobot, and just becomes a very powerful feature for Nautobot jobs. Nautobot expose jobs in a variety of ways. As Tim mentioned, the most common way is probably just going to the Nautobot UI. You have this job on the navigation bar. When you click on it, you see all the jobs that you have available, and then you could execute it right there. But also, we have exposed as an extension to these jobs, job hooks, which is kind of a derivative from webhooks. If you're familiar with webhooks, essentially something changed. It calls a callback to the hook, quote unquote, and then does something. So essentially a job hook is upon the data change. For example, if you add a new device, if you add a new location, it triggers the job, and then the job does some kind of quality check. For example, if your device has certain hostname requirement, airport code, function, numbering, domain name, that sort of stuff, we could actually, once you have this action, it triggers the job hook, and then the job hook would do something automatically in the background, just like a junior engineer or intern, right? Job's your best friend when it comes to that. And the job button is actually one step beyond the job hook. So once you have that automated trigger option, maybe sometimes you don't want to go through the job menu, and then you want to have that job function triggered directly upon whichever page that you have. So for example, this is a show interface command, and you want that job hook to be directly on the page where you have the interface listed, right? So then that's where job button becomes really powerful. Another way to trigger jobs is through the API. API is a first-class citizen. We have feature parity with everything you could do within the UI for the API. So certainly you could trigger jobs through the Nautobot API. And also Nautobot CLI. Jobs could be executed from Nautobot CLI. If you're familiar with Nautobot, I know, just from the poll, we know many of you are just exploring. So, we do have a shell called NB shell, Nautobot shell, that has all the imports necessary and all the libraries that you need in order to get into the internals of Nautobot. So within that NB shell, you can actually execute jobs. And that is a great way to troubleshoot or to dig deeper, especially when just learning to kind of do a manual lever and just what do I do when what happens when I pull this lever? What do I do? What happens when this happens? So the CLI is a very useful place to trigger jobs if you're just troubleshooting or if you're just learning. And the anatomy of Nautobot jobs, it follows a very logical kind of a three section. So the first one is the import. We actually have a bunch of Python scripts, libraries that you could just import that simplifies the creation of the job. As you could see on the example right here, we have the jobs library and all jobs are subclassing that library. So a lot of these attributes and functions, methods are inherited from the base class. So we simply have to define, say, the meta in order to leverage, naming it into some sort of convenient way. Maybe there's an approval required, we just have to set it true or false, and has sensitive variable, for example. Those are all inherited from the base class. And then we have the run function within the job, which is an entry point for a lot of applications. If you go HTML, index.html, that's your entry point, right? If you have some C programs, the run method is your entry point. So in this case, the job is really the run. The run function is really your entry point, and that is where you define most of your job classification. And last is the job registration section. So this is where we actually register your job. We tell Nautobot this is where we want, this is the job that we want to make Nautobot aware that it's available. And just from experience from, the 100 Days of Nautobot project that we'll talk about a little bit, and just from talking to the community, this is probably one of the most overlooked area for newcomers who are just doing job for the first time. And this is partially, perhaps, some of the older documentation for Nautobot 1.0 or 1x is that, in the 1x era, we kind of implicitly import these jobs. And in 2.0, we heard, from the community that explicit is better than implicit, as the Zen of Python says. So we actually makes it explicit. And if you want your job to be registered, you want to have that register jobs. So, let's dive a little bit deeper, right? As you could see, the imports are pretty common, and that's what you do all the time. Register jobs are pretty common. Most of the logics reside within that class. So, again, the metadata is where you could tell some of the characteristics for the jobs. The name, probably a visual for kind of what the job does. And then the run is where you place most of your workflow logic. And just from working with a lot of customers and creating jobs myself, typically what you do is you look at the run, and then you put some logics in there, maybe just line by line, sequential what you want to do. And once that becomes a bit overloaded, then you want to make it into another function and have that run job reference that function, and then keep going at it. And once that reaches a certain critical point, you want to create another job that does maybe some of the stuff that you wanted to do. So it follows a very logical format. And once you start creating your first 5 jobs, right, of the imports and the register become second nature. And then the classes where you spend most of your time on. All right, so when you're defining a job in Python, you could just control it how it appears by setting some attributes. In this particular case, we have the name of the job that it appears in, the description, a general description of these functions. And from last screen, we saw like we could also have approval required, and then the time limits. And this is at the bottom of the screen. You could see this directly reference the whatever we have on the name and the description, and we apply on the UI. Nautobot also gives you a UI for overriding these. Again, just following Python and Django, we want to make sensible defaults. This is just about as straightforward as it gets. But we also want to accommodate experienced users. Let's just say you don't want to define it in the script, or maybe you want the operator have the option of overriding it just because the coder has one thought. Maybe the operator will have something more relevant. So there's also another if you look at that pencil button, you can actually go into the job detail, override a lot of these characters, including the name and description. All right, so Nautobot jobs could also prompt for user input. This is actually one of the most powerful features for jobs, is that just in a few lines of code, we could dynamically interact with the users. And on this particular screen, we have the object var as well as the choice var. So the choice var basically allow users to select from predefined static options. So for example, show version this is as you can see, is a tuple. The first one is how it will show up, and the second one is actual thing, the value that you actually pass it on to Nautobot jobs. And as you can see, we can actually have just the choice var or multiple choice var. We can have the object var or multiple object var. The object var lets user choose the existing object from Nautobot, as Tim mentioned before. One of the most powerful functions for Nautobot jobs, besides just having simple user interaction, is actually to interact directly with the data that you have within Nautobot. You don't have to make API calls. You don't have to create your database separately. You can actually do all of that directly in Nautobot. And this is also another screen for just user inputs. A lot of times we do have a file var, which allows users to upload their file. We see this a lot within device onboarding, or maybe you're launching a new hub site or data center that you have to get a lot of information into Nautobot directly in a very quickly format. So we have a file var, we have a CSV file, maybe the first is your device name, primary IP, description, that sort of stuff. And now once you have that file uploaded, then your Python logic could actually take that file object, parse it out and then do all kinds of logic with it and then bubble up the result through logs or through notification, that sort of stuff. Also, I think this IP address var is just another example of the enhancement improvement that we do within NTC and Nautobot project and Nautobot framework. That this is more than just we take one step further from the standard libraries IP address, as many of you have used it before, but we do one step further and just make it easy for people to say compare IP address, make sure is the slot notation versus like a dot notation or any kind of verification. So that's a great example of kind of enforce the input fields. We could have this interactive workflow with a few lines of code. I mean, if you've done HTML, web development before, in order to have a input, you have to have a form, you have to have some sort of JavaScript for submit, and then redirect the user to another page for success, and all these other stuff that has nothing to do with your logic, nothing to do with what you want. With Nautobot Jobs, with just, I know we display 3 lines, but this is really just 1 line, right? Just with 1 line of code, you can have a file input, you can have file upload, you can have multiple choices and interact directly with the data within Nautobot. So this really makes your job reusable, safer, and in my opinion, pretty user-friendly. Again, the run method of the code is what I think we will spend the most of our time on, because that's where the actual work takes place. And in this example, we actually have this kind of an overview of what a typical job would be. I mean, this is a pretty simple one, but this defines the true logic. So essentially, the jobs should be what data should we capture, either from the user or from Nautobot itself. And then if we have any exceptions, we want to bubble up the information through logs, or within the logs, how severe do we want to be, whether it's a warning, it's an error, or something like that. And then what kind of conditions we want to test. So in this particular example, we saw line 23 is kind of define the scope of the logic. Line 24 directly interact with the data within the object, the location objects, right? And then 26 define the scope for the loop, where we loop over the devices where we collected. And then 27, 31 would generate logs. And it's worth pointing out that these logs are also just built in and go into the normal what you would expect: info, warning, errors, that sort of stuff. And line 32 to 44, logs the error debug message, whether is this particular script is you take the device and you make sure it has a serial number, and then you has some other attributes. Then if it doesn't have a serial number, it go ahead and bubble it up. So this is a very simple data quality check. But this is kind of the overall structure for a lot of the jobs, where we just have this workflow data, do something with the data, and display the results. So I hope this is pretty apparent that with the power of Python, with the power of jobs, there's really the ceiling is actually pretty high on what you could do with Nautobot Jobs. And as engineers progress with the automation journey, I think some Python libraries are encountered more frequently. And Nautobot Jobs, because these are Python scripts, they play nicely with all of these scripts, like the device communication library, NetMiko. We're all big fans of Kirk's work, and I myself, talk to Kirk quite a bit, and just kudos to everything that he does. NetMiko, simple Python library that does SSH connection to the device. Napalm, multi-vendor, consistent API, retrieval configuration data. Noinir, asynchronous operations, multi-threaded, and have a lot of interaction with data modeling libraries. So device modeling libraries: PyYAML, parse and writes YAML, Jinja 2 for template engine for Python that should generate device configuration dynamically in a very structured format. Infrastructure libraries: requests, PyNautobot. Request obviously is a very popular Python library. I believe it's in the standard library now, but I could be wrong. But basically, it's a make REST API calls widely used by Fortune 10, Fortune 100 companies. I think for NASA as well. So it's crazy to think a simple library it could help us. A simple Python library could help us become, multi-planetary species, right? So kudos to the source, to the power of open source. PyNautobot, Python client for Nautobot's REST API. Of course, we have your text FSM for parsing non-structured data into structured data, and NetUtils, which is kudos to Ken and Nautobot and NTC team for putting together these collection of vendor agnostic utilities from network to code to help parsing, validating, and normalizing network data. And it might be interesting to people that text FSM has been an NTC template has been directly supported by NetMiko since 2.0, which is crazy to think it was December 2017, right? So I don't know, it's almost 8 years ago, 7 years ago, that has been adapted with NetMiko. All right, so with that, thank you for listening, and I'll pass it back to Tim for some live demo.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for the great description of how Nautobot Jobs function within the platform and some examples of how you might use Nautobot Jobs in the real world. So now we're going to actually take a look at a few jobs in a working demo environment so we can see kind of what they look like in practice. And here I've got some filtered down in one of our demo environments here, a few simple ones. So, starting off with something just as basic as like hello world. So I'm going to just drill into kind of what that looks like from a practical perspective as far as like how we might run it. So here's an example what the user might be presented with, because obviously this is a very simple job. But first, let's actually go look at the code, right? So here is the Git repository where this code is stored. And this is something you would find under the extensibility option within Nautobot, where you would link the Git repository that you want to put your job code into, and then you can sync that into the Nautobot platform. And as you saw in those examples earlier, right, here's some very basic job code of a hello world job, right? And all it's going to do is basically log hello world when we run it. So you can see, again, as Eric mentioned, right, importing that job class and then creating the subclass that then executes that particular code and puts that log message out there for us. So if we were to just pivot over to that job instance, right, here's that nice UI that the user might be presented with, and we'll just go ahead and run it now, even though it's going to be really simple, just to get an idea of what that looks like and kind of the process that we go through as we use a job. You'll notice a few things here at the top of the screen. First, we're getting, a nice description because we put that in our log, put that in our code, but we also get some other details about like who ran it, when did they run it, what was the status, how long did it take, what did it return, if anything if it returned any values in there, all documented here for us. So jobs give us a great way to run code, particularly when you think about comparing this to, let's say you ran some code on your laptop. None of this is going to be documented. We're not going to know who ran it, why they ran it, when they ran it, what it was for, or anything like that. Versus when we do it on the platform, now we get all of this documented for us. We have a history and a record of everything that was done, as well as a step-by-step process as we go through that job there, right? So here we can see, of course, all we did was print out hello world, right? So simple, pretty easy job. Now let's go look at something maybe a little more interesting that starts to do some perhaps real work, right? So here's one that says, hey, we want to go and update the device serial number on a device. So maybe we have got a bunch of new devices in, or we swap some out or something, and or we know that we're out of sync in our data center compared to what we have on the in Nautobot, right? So we want to get those things updated. So let's take a look at that job now. So if we go into our code here, we can see the, we're going to update that. And apparently I didn't get that copied into this repository. So we won't take a look at the actual code here. We're just going to go ahead and run it so we can see what it does. We're going to say, hey, we want to actually use a form that's a little bit more complicated now. Right, so now we're presenting the user with some more information, as Eric was showing us earlier, where, hey, I can actually choose things from a dropdown. And of course, we do have that power of searching there, so we can make it easy. We can get right to where we want to go, which in this case is going to be Jersey City. And that's going to then filter down the next dropdown for us. So now I'm only going to see devices located in my Jersey City location, making it easy for me. And I know that I want to make this change to my Jersey City router 01. And just to give you a little idea of how you might actually be able to check this, there are various ways. One would be, of course, that you would log into the device itself and you could see that. But it's kind of interesting to think about that Nautobot can actually be used to check something like this. So for example, one of the things that the Golden Config app does is take backups of devices. So I'm going to leverage that functionality here just to demonstrate that for you, which is if I pivot over to this backup that we ran of the device, here's my Jersey City 01 router, and I scroll down and I take a look at what I have here on the device, right? We're seeing all of its configuration. Now, if I look over in my Nautobot side of the world, here's what I have as well as what Nautobot thinks is out there. And right now it thinks that the serial number of that device is 11111, right? Which is probably not correct. So we want to get that updated. So in this case, we're going to do this by hand. There are, of course, various ways you might do this programmatically, but just for purposes of example of how you might use a job. Right? So now let's go back over to our job, and we're going to go ahead and execute that new serial number. And just for making it simple, we'll just use 2s now, right? Just to make sure we can do that, right? So there we'll see that, and we're going to go ahead and execute that. And we're going to make that update into the Nautobot database. So here what we're demonstrating is using the capability of a Nautobot job to interact with Nautobot directly to then update that now into the Nautobot database. So as you can see here, the job reports back that it executed correctly, it did its thing, and let's go see if it did. Right, so here we are back on our Nautobot screen, and we're looking at the device there in Jersey City, and we do a refresh there, and we can now see that serial number has been updated correctly, right? So Nautobot Jobs did what they should do. Now, as you extend this idea, you can think about how you might need to do multiple devices at the same time, or maybe you're programmatically implementing some other change, right? So a really powerful way in which to interact with the data within Nautobot from a Nautobot job. Now, the third example that we have here is getting a little bit more complicated, which is let's go update the interface description on a device itself. So now we're not just updating the data within Nautobot. Now let's actually reach out to the device directly and get it updated. So just again to kind of clarify that idea, I'm going to move back over to the backup configuration of the device. So now we're looking at the configuration on the device directly. And I'm just going to show you that out there, we've got this interface gig 2, and somebody put the wrong description on it, literally the wrong description on it, right? And we need to get that fixed, right? So we want to make sure we get the right description in there. So because we had some nice, easy Nautobot code available to us, we wrote some code to do this, because maybe we need to go fix a bunch, right? So you'll see here a little bit more complicated code. Again, doing those basic imports of the job class, but now we're also doing things like importing the deepen models, and we're also importing the NetMiko connection handler. So we have a lot of power available to us here from using the jobs framework, because if you think about it, right, if you were to write this stuff external to Nautobot, you'd have to go create all of these things yourself and maybe import them from your own libraries. Here in the Nautobot platform, it's all available to you directly. Very easy to now get access to all of that higher level functionality within the platform. You get down to the work you need to do. Don't worry about all of this higher level kind of overhead work, if you will, as far as using that. Next, you can see us describing the filters. So this is how we're creating those fields that the user is selecting from and being able to choose the appropriate device location and then the appropriate device from those nice, easy UI dropdowns, right? So this is how we define that. Super easy to do, making it really easy for you to create nice consumable forms for your users to use. So maybe you want to be able to give the operations team, for example, the ability to run a job. And you want to make sure that they don't, kind of go off the rails and do things they shouldn't do. Here's a great way you can do that. We can filter them down to the areas that they should be working on. They don't need to go, looking at all of the underpinnings of Nautobot. They can just get directly to what it is they need to do, which is in this case is we want to update the interface description, right? Of course, the code itself, right? So here the code itself where we're actually going to make those updates and then use the connection handler to reach out to the device and actually change the device. And again, in this case, we're using NetMiko, but Nautobot being a very flexible framework, there are lots of connection handlers that you might choose from, as Eric was showing earlier, any number of methods in which you might reach out to adjust a device, all the way from something as straightforward as NetMiko up to as complex as maybe you want to use Ansible automation platform to actually reach out and make that change, right? So there are lots of ways in which you might do this. And it really depends on the complexity of your environment and the complexity of the particular workflow that you're building, how you might choose to tackle that problem. So I'm going to just now move over to the screen where we've got that update interface description there for us, right? So now we can see here, hey, I've already pre-selected these just to make it easy for us, right? We've got Jersey City, we've got the router there, and we're going to update that gig interface Ethernet too, right? Just to demonstrate that for you, though, the power of these dropdowns. Sometimes what easily happens is you think you're in one place and you're not, and you accidentally change the wrong thing, for example. Because we're updating these dropdowns as you select the previous one, that helps eliminate those kinds of errors. So for example, when I select Jersey City router 01, I'm only going to get the appropriate interfaces listed to me here. And in fact, you might even filter these down more based on your code within your in your Python code. So for example, maybe you want to make sure the operations team doesn't go mess up gig 1 because that's your uplink, or gig 48, whatever, wherever you put your uplink. You could just not have that in the list at all, right? So you could filter that out. So that's a great way to make sure that users are doing the correct thing and not accidentally making a typo, right? So we'll go ahead and just put the correct description on this device, and we're going to fire it off, and let's run it right now. Highlighting again, you don't have to run it right now, though. You could run it in the future, and you could even set up recurring schedules if you have something that you want to run regularly. So you have a lot of power here again within the UI as far as how you might execute this job and when you want it to run. So let's go ahead and click run there and let it go do its thing. And as you can see, pretty quick here in our demo environment, able to reach out to that device, make the update to the device, and here we go, job completed. Now, in this case, because we actually reached out and touched the device, let's do it a little differently as far as how we check if it worked. Of course, as I mentioned, you could log into the router, of course, directly. That would be one way. But here's another way. So we have the capability to do backups from the Nautobot platform, and that's part of the Golden Config app functionality. So let's go ahead and run a backup from the device now. So I've, again, pre-selected here under our device choices, and we're just going to do all of the same things that you saw me do. But this is one of the default jobs that comes with the Golden Config application, is this backup configuration job. And so it's going to go out, run those backups for us. It's going to reach out to that Jersey City router, do the backup, and put it into our Git repository. So if we go back over to our Git repository now, and we click refresh on our backup file here, and we scroll down, we should see that interface has been updated to the correct description. And lo and behold, there it is, the correct description updated out there on the device. So there's kind of an interesting way that you might use the Nautobot platform to actually do things without having to actually log into a device. And I think this is an interesting story because you can think about this that, hey, maybe I don't allow certain folks, let's say the operations team, to actually log into devices directly. So here's a way they can confirm something. They can double check that the work was done correctly if needed. And of course, we can do this in code as well. But maybe a human wants to put some eyes on something and double check. Here's a way. Users can actually get access to the data they need without having to directly log into the device. So I think that's kind of an interesting use case, particularly when you think about how I can leverage the capability of jobs and all of the different functionalities that jobs have. So that is the demo that we had for you today. Hopefully you find that interesting as you think about how I might use the Nautobot jobs and execute on them. As Eric was highlighting, of course, there are some various shortcut buttons out here as well. So definitely explore those as you look at them and think about how you use them. One other quick highlight that I want to mention on jobs, and it's to Eric's earlier point of being explicit. When you first sync a job into the Nautobot platform, it is not going to be enabled. You are not going to see this little green check, and it will not run if you try to run it. So you're going to need to go in, and you're going to want to edit it, and you're going to come down, and you're going to enable that job. This is a key element of the Nautobot platform and something we implemented because we want to make sure that you are being explicit. If you sync a job into Nautobot, by default, it is not going to be enabled. So you need to make sure you come in and do that. And that is, again, intentional because we want to know that we want to actually use this job on this particular Nautobot instance. So again, that is intentional. You need to come in and enable the job. So just keep that in mind, because otherwise that can get really irritating. Like, why won't this job run it? That's why. You just need to enable it. That's all. So good little tip there for you, making your life easier, hopefully. Okay. Concludes our demo portion of the webinar. So let's get back into looking at the rest of what we have to go through today. Next, we're going to take a look at some use case examples or an overview of how I might use Nautobot jobs and practical uses. Right? So here's one where, hey, we might want to onboard new devices. So easing the burden of onboarding our new devices with automation, right? Scripts can range from simple to sophisticated. And in fact, I often sometimes don't like to even think of them as scripts. I really like to think of them as code because they can be very complex. And scripts kind of implies this very simplistic view of the world, and they don't have to be. Well, they can be, as we saw with that like hello world job, for example. They can also be pretty complex. So keeping that in mind. That Nautobot jobs enable full automation of this, in this case, of onboarding workflow when needed. We could, capture device details and upload them to Nautobot, generate the configuration of the device, register the device with monitoring or our ITSM tool and controller platforms, perform QA testing to verify correct operation, and even generate a report confirming that the deployment was successful. So we have so much power available to us because we literally, whatever you can do in Python, you can do in an Nautobot job. So there's a lot of flexibility to implement not only technical solutions, but also business process. And that's a lot of what we use Nautobot jobs to do, which is the way that you follow process in your organization is probably a little bit different than most others or every other. And so this gives you that capability to implement that logic within your code. And so this showing just one possible flow here, but that's the beauty of Nautobot, right? Like you adapt the platform, you adapt Nautobot jobs to what it is that you need in your organization specifically. We don't try to tell you how to run your organization. The platform adapts to you. We can automate changes. So we can leverage that job hook functionality that we talked about earlier to automatically enact changes. So job hooks enable real-time automation to be triggered by changes inside of Nautobot. And this is where things get really powerful. An engineer, let's say, updates a switch port in Nautobot, something that they were already doing anyway, and now that change triggers a job hook that configures the real device instantly, similar to what you saw me doing where I went out and changed that interface description on the device, for example. The CLI is, of course, still available to you on the device itself, but in this case, you wouldn't have to touch it. And you do have flexibility. Usually when we start talking about this idea that, hey, I changed something in Nautobot and that changes the device directly, sometimes engineers, particularly network engineers, get a little concerned, like that seems scary. So we can put process along the way there. We can include things like approval chain flows that would have to happen prior to that change flowing out. And we can also set up time frames where, hey, maybe it doesn't happen until 2 a.m. during our change window, for example. So don't be afraid of this idea that, hey, I could leverage automation to actually instantiate change on devices. We can still do it carefully, thoughtfully, and following all proper business process along the way. But here we do have this really powerful concept available to us that, hey, I don't actually have to instantiate the change myself. I can let Nautobot handle that. So adding utility to Nautobot pages, these are the job buttons. This is where I can say, hey, I want to make it simpler for a user to do a particular thing and leverage a Nautobot job. This is where now I just click the button within that Nautobot page and I run that job behind the scenes. So a really interesting way, again, to use jobs, to be able to get work done, to make my life easier, to make the platform more adapted to your environment. So you can see an example here that, hey, rather than you saw me going and manually running that backup job in order to pull the backups down from the device, here we're just saying, hey, click the save backup config button. So making the life of the engineer or operator easier, because in this case, like they wouldn't have to go select the device specifically. It's just going to take it from the page that it's on, right? So really interesting way to use job buttons. Another thought here. So as we talked about Nautobot jobs, and you see they're so powerful, but of course they do mean that you need to have Python developer skills. And that means that A, you're going to need to learn how to write Python if you don't already know, and you're going to need to become familiar with the Nautobot way to use Python, right? One interesting concept that can use is leveraging Nautobot GPT. This is a way to generate jobs and allow Nautobot GPT to help you vibe code, if you will, to create Nautobot jobs simpler, faster, and easier, even potentially enabling less experienced developers or people that are just learning how to write Python to be able to level up their skills and do these kinds of functions really quickly and really easily. We're bridging that skills gap and delivering results fast. So in the old way, we would spend hours learning and writing a new job from scratch. We'd be looking through documentation, especially if we're just learning to create that job, or troubleshooting when there's a problem, or maybe even customizing an existing job. Now we can do it in just seconds, right? We can look up information. We can understand, hey, how does this code work? What does this error mean? I've never seen this error before. What does it mean? Getting those answers back from Nautobot GPT. And I think, to me, the most powerful thing is understanding old code. Somebody else wrote the code. I have no idea what they were doing. This is confusing me. There's all these different classes being imported. I don't know what this class does. Very easy to understand code when we put it into Nautobot GPT, making it so much easier to adjust existing code without me having to actually drill into every single bit of detail within that code as I try to understand what it does. So to me, again, really powerful use. Something to consider if you aren't using Nautobot GPT, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to get you on board and understanding how to leverage Nautobot GPT to make your life better. All right, so let's move on to some Q&A. I know we've been answering a few here along the way during the session. I think we have a few open as well. This is your chance. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section for us, as well as anyone interested in Nautobot GPT. We did drop a link there in the chat for you. All right, so let's start taking a look at these questions and see what we got. So we got one from Sean that says, if you choose a location in a job like in Eric's example script, does it get all the devices in child locations as well recursively? And if not, is there a way to do that? So I'm going to pitch that over to Eric since it's his example. And let's see what you have to say here on this one, Eric.
Well, I think you kind of answer it with your demo, right? And with your code base. So essentially, if you just choose the object, and usually what you do want is you want to create all. Like if you're familiar with database queries or Django queries, you create all, but then you could limit it with your query parameters. So you could do the filter as Tim shown before, where they filter with certain locations with prefixes and so on and so forth, and then you could bundle that up into just whether when you have this device, when you have this location in New Jersey, then you only show Jersey devices, and when you have Jersey devices, you only show the interfaces within that device. So you could certainly do that, but by default, you build it recursively.
Great, thank you. From Jeff, we have one who was spying on some of the jobs apparently on the screen as we were looking through there. Is that generate firewall configs with Kapirica job that I saw publicly available in GitHub, and are you able to share? So that particular job comes as part of the security module within Nautobot. So yes, it is absolutely available, and you would find it if you installed the security module that will be there. One of the interesting concepts within Nautobot is the ability to model your firewall policies. It doesn't have to be firewall, any ACL for that matter. So your security policies can be modeled in Nautobot in a vendor neutral fashion. That is, we store them in the Kapirica format. And then we leverage Kapirica to output those configurations in a large number of vendor formats, right? So you can have this industry standard, if you will, and then output into the appropriate devices syntax from that database within Nautobot. So yes, short answer. Interesting job, absolutely. And also showing you this idea, as Eric had alluded to in his sections, where applications will often come with jobs. And so you'll see that, and that's a perfect example of where an app, that's the security module within Nautobot, comes with that job. Yep, absolutely. Is Nautobot GPT open source? Short answer, no, it is not. It is one of the paid-for applications within the Nautobot ecosystem. So no, it is not open source. Let's see, another question. Two of the example jobs shown, changing interface description and changing untagged VLAN, wouldn't these be better suited to update the interface description in the Nautobot database and push the changes from there rather than doing ad hoc? Absolutely, yes. For simplicity here in the demo, we just went direct to the device. We wanted to not confuse and do multiple steps. But in the real world, you are absolutely correct. We would want to be updating that source of truth first and then proceeding from there. And there are any number of ways that might happen in the real world. So absolutely great point, Sean. Thank you for calling us out on not following our own best practice, but it was for purposes of a demo. And we actually did do that intentionally, that we didn't want to make the job overly complicated. So, but you're absolutely correct. Yes. Let's see. Do I need to save to Nautobot before running a golden config job? I don't quite understand the question there. I think you're saying, how would I use a golden config job? And if that is what you're asking, the short answer is you would need to install the golden config application, and then those jobs would come along with it. So that, I think, is what you're asking. But if not, feel free to follow up with a further on question there. Let's see. Does the Golden Config plugin, and by the way, we don't call them plugins anymore. We do call them apps. So just a little correction for you there. Does the Golden Config app work with all kinds of routers, or at least like devices from Nokia, Juniper, Arista, and Cisco? So if you look in the Golden Config application repository, you will see the list of supported devices, but it is a very large list. To your point, virtually all major vendors and devices are supported. And even if it isn't directly supported out of the box, it's pretty easy to add on an additional, vendor's syntax. So short answer is probably yes, most likely for anything that you're looking for. So yes for it. If you have any comments, by the way, Eric, feel free to chime in as we're motoring through these questions here as well.
No, you're doing great, Tim. And thank you, Florian, for putting that answer. I don't know if it's the same Florian, but hey, hello if you are.
Let's see, someone asking about Nautobot GPT. Which LLM do you use for Nautobot GPT? Can I use my own personal local one? Short answer is at the moment right now, we are using the OpenAI LLM. However, it is built to be very modular so that we will be able to leverage different LLMs. At the moment, as far as I know, you do not have that capability currently to bring your own, but that is something that we're looking at and will eventually most likely be enabled. So eventually, but not currently today, as far as I understand. Okay. Oh, we got some follow-up here. So you are using the Golden Config app. Great, love to see it. But indented config is not generating, it's only creating a get repo push. So a couple of things. One, if you are a NTC consumer, that is, you have Nautobot support from us, you can absolutely reach out to the support team. They will help you. If not, reach out on our public Slack. Our engineers are pretty responsive there. They're definitely able to give you some assistance there with using the app. So if you're not already in our public Slack, just go ahead and join that, and we'll get you some answers to help you out that. Okay, from Bruce, one of the challenges in developing a network automation job, one of the challenges in developing a network automation job, and let's assume Python is being used in the job. Well, it would have to be because yes, network automation jobs within Nautobot are only Python. One could say there could be 3 programming domain logics in a given job. So that you have the Python programming logic, the Jinja templating logic, and perhaps Ansible playbook logic. Sure, that makes sense. Good. One of the takeaways I'm getting from this webinar is perhaps running Nautobot jobs allows a developer to rely less on dealing with Ansible playbook logic and perhaps Ansible playbooks at all. Am I correct in thinking this? 100% yes. One of the things we first did with Nautobot is really deeply integrate Ansible into the platform. So for example, if I'm using a Jinja template within the Nautobot ecosystem, I don't need to worry about all that Ansible overhead of how I merge that template and get, say, inventory file, creating group vars and device vars, all that stuff. All of that's handled dynamically by the Nautobot platform. So really making your life easier when you're consuming, let's say, something like a Jinja template, or even feeding data into an Ansible playbook. Nautobot's going to handle all that overhead for you. Now, I had this question from a client actually just yesterday, which was, how do I decide, should I just use a job or should I use a job that also leverages Ansible and or Ansible automation platform? And I think it really comes down to the complexity of your workflow. So Nautobot jobs can absolutely be chained. So you can create really complex workflows using Nautobot jobs. However, you're going to have to handle all the error checking, all the error handling, all of the if then else tree structure yourself, right? So you're going to have to write your Python code that's going to then execute another job. It's going to wait for the results. It's going to look at the results, make decisions based on what happened there. Essentially, you're creating your own orchestration engine. Depending on the complexity of your job, why do that? You already have Ansible. We already have Ansible automation platform potentially within your environment. It's really good orchestration platform. Leverage it, use it for what it can do. If your job is complex, if your job is really simple, maybe you don't need that overhead and you just do everything directly within Nautobot and the Nautobot job and in Python. So it really depends on the complexity of your workflow, in my opinion. Now I'm going to give Eric a chance to see if he has anything different from opinion on that, but that would be my take. You decide what is the complexity of using Ansible automation platform worth it, or maybe I don't actually need it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think this is a very personal decision and largely relies on your team's capability. If your team's more familiar with Ansible, if Ansible is being used by, in a lot of instances that we saw was already used by system DevOps administration, then yeah, by all means, use leveraging the existing Ansible. But if you're starting from scratch, more and more we see people starting directly from Python. So it really is kind of individualized and we're flexible enough to accommodate both. and hopefully you can make that decision based on your own situation.
Yeah. Yep. This one I'm definitely going to have to give to you, Eric, because I don't know the answer. Let's see if you know. Is it possible to integrate Container Lab natively through apps in the Nautobot platform?
Yeah, I don't see why not. And then later on, when we go through a resource section, we have 100 Days of Nautobot. And in all the examples, we actually use Container Lab as the lab platform. We're using a bridge interface for containers. So as long as you have reachability, you could definitely use Container Lab. And it's up to you to see which portion of Container Lab, how deeply integrated you want it to be, right? So that's kind of this question of needs more understanding on your use cases, but we have some basic use cases in 100 Days of Nautobot that definitely use Container Lab.
Yeah. Now, here's a great question coming from Evanish, which is, hey, I already have Ansible Automation Platform or AWX, I'm not sure which, or you name the orchestration engine already in my environment. Do I need Nautobot? Why should I use Nautobot? You absolutely need Nautobot, and here's why. When you run any of these orchestration platforms, what you need to do is now create your inventory file, your group files, your device files, all of that overhead that comes with maintaining those platforms. And it doesn't matter which one you're using. And you probably have multiples, particularly as you start to scale up. Maybe you're using CI/CD pipelines. You have all of these different areas where I'm going to need to define data and feed data into these platforms. That's what Nautobot's purpose is in that kind of reference architecture, which is where we define the data in Nautobot, and Nautobot feeds the data automatically into those platforms for you. So now you get to leverage the capabilities of those platforms without having to deal with the overhead of maintaining and using those platforms, right? So you get the power of them without the complexity of having to maintain them. That's where Nautobot shines. Nautobot gives you that capability to say, hey, I define data in a single place in my environment, and then I use Nautobot to feed data into every other tool or every other workflow, every other job, etc., throughout my environment. So a great question, and that's exactly why we want Nautobot in the mix. Let's see, any others here? Quick follow-up question from Bruce. With running Nautobot jobs, I have the option of eliminating the need to use AAP and or AWX at all. You just answered my question. I can run Nautobot only jobs with need to use them as well. Yeah, okay. So you were just saying thank you. Appreciate that, Bruce. Sometimes reading questions on the fly, I don't always pick up that you're just giving me a shout out. So appreciate it. Let's see. And now CI/CD. I've got a couple of questions on CI/CD pipelines. Will we implement them? How do you? So absolutely, we see CI/CD as really important, and this is something that we typically find with clients as they get further along in their journey. Nautobot integrates well with various CI/CD engines and pipelines. So yes, absolutely. Would it be something we would implement within Nautobot? Unlikely. There's no reason for us to do that. Right? That's not the role of Nautobot. There are lots of good tools out there that already do this. So we integrate with them rather than implement that capability directly in the platform. So pretty unlikely.
And just to add to what Tim said, for the past 2 AutoCons in a row, we actually did workshops by NTC folks on CI/CD integration and doing jobs, Nautobot, that sort of stuff. So if you want to see another workshop, please do in the public Slack channel promote another CI/CD workshop. We're happy to conduct it. It's just decision is not up to us. So if you want to see more CI/CD integration, please do let the community know.
Yep. One last question here. It looks like there was a question on any information on 3.0 when it might be released. It is coming soon. Let me put it that way. We don't have a firm date yet, but as soon as it is available, we will publish it for you. But it is going to be soon. Don't worry. Another one about community repo where sample jobs. To my knowledge, we don't have anything like that today. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's an interesting concept. Not sure if it's something we would do, but definitely interesting, something we could at least consider. Some way for folks to share sample jobs, perhaps. Great idea. And something we can chat about internally here at NTC. Let's see, any other interesting, I think that concludes most of the questions that we have left out here. If I didn't get to yours, I do apologize, but we are approaching time, so we need to get back into the webinar as we close it out. So moving on to, as we conclude out the webinar, thank you all for attending today, and I'm going to hand over to Eric for some closing notes.
Yeah, so thanks again for attending today's webinar. We do have a lot of resources. The idea about posting a community contribution sample jobs that's very interesting. So we do, so we'll take that into consideration. But we already have a Nautobot job block series that takes you from zero to at least get the hello world and maybe some of the more interesting aspects of Nautobot and Nautobot jobs documentation. We do try to keep the documentation thorough and guided installation video series. If you're kind of a visual learner, please do feel free to follow that. And seeing is believing. So the video series is actually quite wonderful in doing that aspect for learners. And of course, yours truly, 100 Days in Nautobot, that's my passion. And, thank you for NTC for making this widely available. It doesn't require any specialized software. It takes you directly from zero to at least in section 10. So for the first 20 days, you will cover everything that Tim had mentioned. It doesn't require any special software, and it takes you a guided tour. It does take some investment on your end, but hopefully the quality of content justify for those. And please do sign up if you just wanted to take Nautobot for Nautobot jobs for a spin. Just concentrate on the first 20 days, and if you like it, please continue. And just to recap, we covered what are Nautobot jobs, the jobs framework. Tim did a wonderful job on the demo, as well as the first part on covering Nautobot jobs, use cases, and we provide resources. And we're up on time. I'm just really happy to see the community be engaged, all the wonderful questions that's being posted. If we didn't get to it, as Tim mentioned, we'll get back to you definitely. And thanks again for attending. Happy automation. Happy automating.